Hello everyone, this is Andres Restart, and the most recent Nintendo Direct has made something really crystal clear to me. The series producer for The Legend of Zelda, Eiji Aonuma, has built up a really significant track record of teasing future Zelda releases. And so by looking at this long track history, not only do we see some very interesting habits by Aonuma, but I also feel we can pretty much gauge what's to come next. And so I don't really think we need any leaks or rumors, because Aonuma is better than all of them when it comes to telling us about what's next for Zelda. And there are some exciting things I believe he has been teasing, and so that's what I would like to dive further into today. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So during the most recent Nintendo Direct, Eiji Aonuma came out and announced the next Legend of Zelda game that's coming out this September. It is The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, and surprise surprise, the main character this time around is not Link, but rather Princess Zelda herself. But what's funny is that this wasn't really much of a surprise to me. Yeah, there were some rumors, but even before that, I was making videos back in December about a Zelda game having a playable Zelda, a mainline Zelda game. And why? Because Aonuma likes to tease these things, and after this most recent Direct, that has become painfully clear. So back in early December of last year, this is what Aonuma said to IGN in an interview. Yeah, it is interesting when you think about the name of the series, The Legend of Zelda. But Link is always the main character, and Link has been the main character and Zelda has always been involved, and they have a relationship and their own rules in each of the games. But it is true that I think there's always room for thinking about this type of thing and Zelda's role, and there may be some sort of possibility for something like that in the future. And then Aonuma interjects in English, because he normally speaks Japanese and everything I just read to you was a translation from Japanese, but this part he said in English right after. Maybe, which I find to be a very curious behavior that we'll be speaking on more so a little bit later on. But the point is here, Aonuma broke character at the end and had teased us a future Zelda title where Princess Zelda would be playable. And what happened half a year later? They have now confirmed Echoes of Wisdom, the first mainline Nintendo-made Zelda title that is starring Princess Zelda as the main playable character. Coincidence? I definitely think not, especially after considering everything else I'm going to be bringing up today for this video. So sure, some of you may just think this is just a coincidence. And if it was just this one isolated example, I'd be inclined to agree to at least an extent. But as I've already alluded to, I have several examples to bring up here. So going back to 2016, Eiji Aonuma took part in an interview with Edge magazine, and he said this: "Actually, Nintendo's been telling me to create a new IP, but then they're also telling me to make more Zelda games. I can't really share much. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say anything. But I really like the idea of a game where I can live as a thief. That's all I'll say." So this part fascinates me because he says, I can't really share much. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say anything. So he's not supposed to say much of anything at all, and yet he goes out and says something. And what he says is that he would like to see a game where you can live as a thief. And so a few years later, Nintendo confirmed in 2019 The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Remake, where in that game, you can steal from a shop and be called a thief throughout your adventure. Some of you might think, well, that's just a mighty fine coincidence, except it's not. Because Aonuma went back to Edge to have another interview, and when asked about this thief comment and if it was a subtle hint, he immediately laughed and responded by confirming that it was indeed a tease. So here we have proof from Aonuma himself that he does tease things. Going back to 2018, there was a Legend of Zelda orchestra concert, and Aonuma attended. He showed up in the event, and out there in front of the audience, he said this: we know what you are thinking. Skyward Sword on Switch, right? And everyone freaked out and got excited. He was excited. And then shortly afterwards, Nintendo had to put out a statement saying that there are no plans to release The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword on Nintendo Switch. In hindsight, this was very, very clearly damage control. Aonuma stepped out of bounds and told us something about the future of Zelda a few years beforehand when he shouldn't, somewhat similar to when he teased Link's Awakening Remake 3 years before its release. So at this point, looking at these different interviews in hindsight, we have a pattern. We have 3 different scenarios where Aonuma was definitely teasing a future Zelda release a few years later, or a few months later in the case of Echoes of Wisdom. And each time, he breaks character a little bit. He's either out on stage and there's this big excitement going on, he's laughing, or he butts in a comical way and speaking a different language saying maybe, maybe, maybe. I believe there is something to this. I think when Aonuma does something like this during an interview, it is a sign that what he's speaking on in that moment is indeed some level of a hint towards a future Zelda release. Now I recognize that some watching may think that this whole laughing thing with Aonuma is a real stretch, but I made another interesting discovery here from an interview that I think supports my argument. So in this IGN interview from back in 2013 before Majora's Mask 3D was announced, IGN wrote this about Aonuma's response in regards to a Majora's Mask 3D. Please write that I laughed, Aonuma told IGN in response after indeed laughing. Don't make it sound like I laughed because I was troubled or inconvenienced or put out. I don't want them to read anything into it, but if you want to say that I laughed, I think that would be a good answer. When pressed about how fans should interpret that, Aonuma simply told us, it's really up to them. If they want to interpret my laughter as, yeah, we're making it, or no, we're not, I guess that's really up to them. Majora's Mask 3D was announced. It happened. But let's continue on with the evidence here. In an IGN interview back in 2017 after the release of Breath of the Wild towards the end of the year, Aonuma said this, "You know, I can't speak to what other companies will do in their own games, but I think for me, especially just in terms of the Zelda series, the incredible freedom that this game offers you and how well that's been received, to me it means that freedom, that level of freedom, is something that needs to be maintained in Zelda games going forward. My eyes have been open to how important that is." So this statement in comparison to Aonuma's other statements where he's teased future Zelda games is not the same. He's not necessarily breaking character, but he's also not necessarily teasing at a specific game. He's just talking about the overall future of the series, talking about building on the freedom that was established with Breath of the Wild. And so for the next big 3D Zelda game that was only announced a year and a half later, Tears of the Kingdom, that's pretty much the main focus of the game, building on the freedom established in Breath of the Wild. And so maybe this one isn't a specific tease and is not as big of a deal. I think it depends on how you look at it. Aonuma here basically told us what the overall direction for Zelda is moving forward, and from everything we've seen so far, not just with Tears of the Kingdom in a post-Breath of the Wild world, but also Echoes of Wisdom, seeing the echoes and the wide variety of applications that mechanic will have, it's very clear that freedom is at the forefront of Zelda design now. And Aonuma was telling us this years in advance. But let's now get to what I'm sure many of you already know what I've been building up to. But also, by the way, there's more than that, and so we'll get to that too. But yes, I think Aonuma teases future Zelda games, and I think there are other interviews out there where he's teased other Zelda games that have yet to have been confirmed yet. And the one I have in mind is a remake for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Why do I think this? Well, let's get to the interviews. In this Nintendo Dream magazine, both Fujibayashi and Aonuma took part in this interview after the release of Tears of the Kingdom. And there was a part where they were talking about the character Rauru from Tears of the Kingdom. And this is what the director of the Zelda series, Fujibayashi, said. His name comes from his role. In the Zelda series, Rauru, here the translation shows Raoul because it's in Japanese, but it is Rauru, is a guiding presence. In this work, to depict Princess Zelda's further growth, she is guided by the king and queen of the country's founding era in the past world. When we thought about what kind of person would be suitable for such a role, we chose someone named Rauru. So if you're unfamiliar with the history of Rauru outside of Tears of the Kingdom, Rauru was actually a character in Ocarina of Time. He was a guiding figure for Link throughout that adventure. But also Rauru was a town in Zelda 2. But this is what Aonuma had to say. When I first heard that he would be named Rauru, I thought it was a very natural progression. But I wonder how many people who are currently playing Tears know the character Rauru. Laughs. So let me remind you, when he has been teasing a specific game, go back to Skyward Sword, he came out on stage and in some excitement said something he shouldn't have. In the case of Echoes of Wisdom, he interjected in English and not Japanese saying maybe, 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 and when he teased Link's Awakening, he also laughed. And here he's talking about the character Rauru, not thinking people would know who that character is anymore. Perhaps because the last time we saw Ocarina of Time was Ocarina of Time 3D, which came out back in 2011. It's already 2024, so it's been a while, but I think he's teasing something here. Some of you may believe this is a stretch, despite everything I've already brought up already on the correlations. But there's more. So there was also a Game Informer interview that took place last holiday. And here Aonuma was asked, "Thank you both so much for your time. I've heard about how sometimes questions about games can inspire them to be made. So I selfishly want to ask you about a modern Ocarina of Time remake, but I have a feeling I know the answer I'll get." Aonuma laughs, no comment. So the laughing thing has come back, stepping a little out of character in comparison to the overall tone for the rest of the interview, and he says no comment. He does not confirm, he cannot confirm, but he does not deny. And I think this is very important because during the same period of time we had another interview. Aonuma was asked about a dungeon maker, and he denied the idea. He said that it would not likely be to happen because he feels that Tears of the Kingdom would fulfill that creative role. And so looking at all these different interviews with Aonuma, he does tease things. We have proof, he's done it multiple times. And we have two different interviews where he breaks character a little bit, laughs, and says something that could be teasing a future Zelda game. And we're also noting this correlation with him doing something somewhat comical when potentially teasing something. But also Aonuma, not only does he tease us things, he tells us what to expect for the future of the series. If Princess Zelda could take on a more significant role of a game, he will suggest that. If the overall direction of the series is going to be focusing more on freedom, he will suggest that. If something is not going to happen, he will make that clear, in this case of denying the idea of a dungeon maker, or even Tears of the Kingdom DLC. So then, why wouldn't he deny the possibility of an Ocarina of Time remake? In my opinion, especially when we account for everything mentioned throughout this video, it's because he's teasing it, and so I find this kind of hilarious actually, because it's turning out to be an interesting sort of situation because Aonuma, being the high figure he is, seems to continually run into a little bit of trouble with telling us about the future of the Zelda series when Nintendo, the figureheads, don't actually want him to, but he does it anyways. It's a very fascinating situation, I would say. And so yes, I think an Ocarina of Time remake is going to happen. Even beyond these interviews, Nintendo does need to give us some sort of proper, significant 3D Zelda offering early on for their next generation console. The next brand new Zelda is years away. Tears of the Kingdom took over a half-decade to make. They're not going to be ready with another anytime soon, and so they're going to have to put out something else Zelda major early on for the console. Something that will bring over the core Zelda fanbase. Nintendo has done this many times in the past. If it's not a new Zelda, it's some sort of reworking of a prior one. And so this is what I think, it makes the most sense. Now in terms of window of time for when I expect something like this to come out, I think it's something that they would use closer to the release of the Zelda movie. So basically I'm thinking past 2025 at this point. When we consider that both Pokemon Legends ZA and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond are already slated for 2025, and there are the rumors of a new 3D Mario and Mario Kart, and Monolith Soft is on pace to put out another game next year as well. In terms of Nintendo's big releases, They might not need a big Zelda like this. Maybe something smaller, sure. So I'm thinking that whatever this is, if it is indeed an Ocarina of Time remake, I think we would see it. At this point, I'm thinking we'll see it in 2026, especially when you consider Echoes of Wisdom. It's a new Zelda game, we're getting it in just a few months, and it's only a year and a half removed from Tears of the Kingdom, at least by the time it comes out. So we've gotten a lot of new significant Zelda already. I think we can wait a little bit for something else that's kind of major. But considering that we've now established that Aonuma very much teases the future of the Zelda series in his different interviews, is there anything more we can gain from things he said so far? And I think so. So going back to that same Game Informer interview where he very arguably teased an Ocarina of Time remake, there was something else that I found quite interesting. So Aonuma was asked if he has ruled out another direct sequel, and this is what he says. He laughs to start off, so remember the whole laughing, going out of character thing, getting a little comical, and then responds by saying, well, that would be a sequel to a sequel, which is getting a little bit wild when you think about it. But as I've mentioned previously, with Tears of the Kingdom, we were seeking to build on top of the world we created with Breath of the Wild, and really exhaust the possibilities we could put into that world. I think it is, to use a bit of a term, an apotheosis, or the final form of that version of The Legend of Zelda. In that regard, I don't think we'll be making a direct sequel to a world such as that we've created. And so here, I think pretty clearly Aonuma is telling us that we should not be expecting a continuation of the Breath of the Wild, the Tears of the Kingdom storyline, at least not directly. It's not going to be a trilogy. And it makes sense, because Breath of the Wild and Tears are for the Switch generation. This generation is ending, we're moving on to another one. It's to be expected. So considering the interviews we've discussed so far, when it comes to the next new 3D open-air Zelda, what we can glean from interviews is that it's not going to be a direct sequel to Tears of the Kingdom, and that they will be building on the freedom. Tears of the Kingdom built off of that, and they're probably going to continue to do that even more so. Now, I'll also mention that Tears did take steps to incorporate even more Zelda traditions while still maintaining this open-air freedom concept, and I expect that trend to continue. So I believe that the next Zelda game will appeal to an even larger part of the overall Zelda audience. But we're not quite done yet. I think there's a little bit more we can extrapolate from interviews here. So when Tears of the Kingdom came out, Zachary Small had an interview from New York Times with Aonuma and Fujibayashi, and he had a few interesting takeaways. Here Zachary says, I also wondered about Ganondorf's return in this game. Many players hoped he would be playable or given stronger motivation beyond I am evil. The developer said it was very possible he would get more chances to show in future titles. So when we consider the context of the recently announced Echoes of Wisdom and how Princess Zelda is now taking on a more expanded role, I think this has more weight now. If we're seeing a game where the Triforce of Wisdom and Princess Zelda are being explored a bit more, who's to say we can't have a future game where Ganondorf will also be explored a bit more? Now, personally, I'm not expecting him to be playable, although a spin-off where Ganondorf is playable might actually be really cool. But I do think this idea where we could see more about the character of Ganondorf, how he got to where he was, play around with the idea of him being evil, or maybe not even being fully evil, maybe there's some gray area there. I think they can build on that, and perhaps there's a little bit of a hinting here with what we're seeing. But something else that I think is interesting and worth noting. Zachary Small also said that Fujibayashi already has plans for the next Zelda game, though he hasn't even told Aonuma about it yet. So, firstly, I believe they're talking about the next open-air 3D Zelda, because I would say something like Echoes of Wisdom is probably being developed by Grezzo. They made Link's Awakening Remake, it's using the same art style. They haven't really been working on anything as of late. They released Jet Dragon a while ago, a small iOS game. So, I would say it's likely that Grezzo is the developer for Echoes of Wisdom, but that's not confirmed yet. Point being, I would say most likely Fujibayashi is talking about the next Zelda game, and I would also doubt that Aonuma wouldn't know about Echoes of Wisdom when it's only about a year and a few months away from release. But, at least by this point, by the release of Tears of the Kingdom, Aonuma did not know about these Zelda plans. which to me just goes back to this whole fascinating idea of Aonuma not being really good at keeping secrets, or perhaps preferring to tell us a little bit about these secrets because he wants to engage with us fans and excite a Zelda fanbase about what's to come next. I just think it's funny to think about. Regardless though, in terms of the next Zelda games, I am anticipating an Ocarina of Time remake. We'll see what happens, but I feel good with these interviews here. And when it comes to the next new open-air Zelda game, I would not be surprised if Ganondorf does take on a more significant role, but this game is not in any way a sequel to Tears of the Kingdom, but its own thing, a new beginning, and likely still building off the open-air freedom of Tears and Breath. But what do you all think? Are there any interviews out there with Eiji Aonuma where he may have been hinting at something that could tell us more about the future of Zelda? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.